The existence of no ships raises the possibility of destroying entire planets without retaliation. A large object, asteroid or equivalent, may be sent against the planet, or the people can be set against each other by sexual subversion and then be armed to destroy themselves. These honored matres appear to favor this latter technique. Bene Gesserit analysis. From his position in the courtyard, and even when not appearing to do so, Duncan Idaho kept his attention on the observers around him. There was Patron, of course, but Patron did not count. It was the Reverend Mothers across from Patron who bore watching. Seeing Lucilla, he thought, "That's a new one." This thought filled him with a surge of excitement, which he took out in renewed exercise. He completed the first 3 patterns of the training play Miles Tegg had ordered, vaguely aware that Patron would report on how well he did. Duncan liked Tegg, and old Patron sensed that the feeling was reciprocated. This new Reverend Mother, though, her presence suggested interesting changes. For one thing, she was younger than the others. Also, this new one did not try to hide the eyes that were a first clue to her membership in the Bene Gesserit. His first glance at Shuang Yu had confronted him with eyes concealed behind contact lenses that simulated non-addict pupils and slightly bloodshot whites. He had heard one of the Keep's acolytes say Shuang Yu's lenses also corrected for a astigmatic weakness that had been accepted in her genetic line as a reasonable exchange for the other qualities she transmits to her offspring. At the time, most of this remark was unintelligible to Duncan, but he had looked up the references in the Keep's library, references both scarce and severely limited in content. Shuang Yu herself parried all of his questions on the subject, but the subsequent behavior of his teachers told him she had been angry. Typically, she had taken out her anger on others. What really upset her, he suspected, was his demand to know whether she was his mother. For a long time now, Duncan had known he was something special. There were places in the elaborate compound of this Bene Gesserit keep where he was not permitted. He had often found private ways to evade such prohibitions and had stared out through thick plaids and open windows at guards and wide reaches of cleared ground that could be enfiladed from strategically positioned pillboxes. Miles Tegg himself had thought the significance of enfilade positioning. Gamu, the planet was called. Once it had been known as Gaiety Prime, but someone named Gurney Halleck had changed that. It was all ancient history, dull stuff. There still remained a faint smell of bitter oil in the planet's dirt from its pre-Danian days. Millennia of special plantations were changing that, his teachers explained. He could see part of this from the keep. Forests of conifers and other trees surrounded them here. Still covertly watching the 2 Reverend Mothers, Duncan did a series of cartwheels. He flexed his striking muscles as he moved, just the way Tegg had taught him. Tegg also instructed in planetary defenses. Gamu was ringed by orbiting monitors whose crews could not have their families aboard. The families remained down here on Gamu, hostage to the vigilance of those guardian orbiters. Somewhere among the ships in space, there were undetectable no-ships whose crews were composed entirely of the Bashar's people and Bene Gesserit sisters. I would not have taken this assignment without full charge of all defensive arrangements, Tegg explained. Duncan realized that he was the assignment. The keep was here to protect him. Tegg's orbiting monitors, including the no-ships, protected the keep. It was all part of a military education whose elements Duncan found somehow familiar. Learning how to defend a seemingly vulnerable planet from attacks originated in space, he knew when those defenses were correctly placed. It was extremely complicated as a whole, but the elements were identifiable and could be understood. There was, for instance, the constant monitoring of atmosphere and of the blood serum of Gamu's inhabitants. Suk doctors in the pay of Bene Gesserit were everywhere. Diseases are weapons, Teg said. Our defense against diseases must be finely tuned. Frequently, Teg railed against passive defenses. He called them the product of a siege mentality, long known to create deadly weaknesses. When it came to military instructions from Teg, Duncan listened carefully. Patron in the library records confirmed that the Mentat Bashar, Miles Teg, had been a famous military leader for the Bene Gesserit. Patron often referred to their servitude together, and always Teg was the hero. Mobility is the key to military success, Teg said. If you tied down the forts, even whole planet forts, you are ultimately vulnerable. Teg did not much care for Gamu. I see that you already know this place was called Gaiety Prime once. The Harkonnens who ruled here taught us a few things. We have a better idea, thanks to them, of how terrifyingly brutal humans can become. As he recalled this, Duncan observed that the two Reverend Mothers watching from the parapet obviously were discussing him. Am I the new one's assignment? Duncan did not like being watched, and he hoped the new one would allow him some time to himself. She did not look like a tough one, not like Xuan Yu. As he continued his exercises, Duncan timed them to a private litany. Damn Xuan Yu, damn Xuan Yu. He had hated Xuan Yu from the age of 9, 4 years now. She did not know his hate, he thought. He had probably forgotten all about the incident where his hate had been ignited. Barely 9, and he had managed to slip through the inner guards out into a tunnel that led into one of the pillboxes. Smell of fungus in the tunnel, dim lights, dampness. He peered out through the box's weapon slits before being caught and hustled back to the core of the keep. This escapade occasioned a stern lecture from Xuan Yu, a remote and threatening figure whose orders must be obeyed. That was how he still thought of her, although he had since learned about the Bene Gesserit voice of command, that vocal subtlety which could bend the will of an untrained listener. She must be obeyed. You have occasioned the discipline of an entire guard unit, Xuan Yu said. They will be severely punished. That had been the most terrible part of her lecture. Duncan liked some of the guards and occasionally lured some of them into real play with laughter and tumbling. His prank, sneaking out of the pillbox, had hurt his friends. Duncan knew what it was to be punished. Damn Xuan Yu! Damn Xuan Yu! After Xuan Yu's lecture, Duncan ran to his chief instructor of the moment, Reverend Mother Tamalane, another of the wizened old ones with a cool and aloof manner, snowy hair above a narrow face and a leather skin. He demanded of Tamalane to know about the punishment of his guards. Tamalane fell into a surprisingly pensive mood, her voice like sand rasping against wood. Punishments? Well, well. They were in the small teaching room. They were there in the small teaching room off the larger practice floor where Tamalane went each evening to prepare the next day's lessons. It was a place of bubble and spool readers and other sophisticated means for information storage and retrieval. Duncan preferred it to the library, but he was not allowed into the teaching room unattended. It was a bright room lighted by many suspensory buoyed snow globes. At his intrusion, Tamalane turned away from where she laid out his lessons. There's always something of a sacrificial banquet about our major punishments, she said. The guards will, of course, receive major punishment. Banquet? Duncan was puzzled. Tamalani swung completely around in her swivel seat and looked directly into his eyes. Her steely teeth glittered in the bright lights. History has seldom been good to those who must be punished, she said. Duncan flinched at the word history. It was one of Tamalani's signals. She was going to teach a lesson, another boring lesson. Bene Gesserit punishments cannot be forgiven. Bene Gesserit punishments cannot be forgotten. Duncan focused on Tamalani's old mouth, sensing abruptly that she spoke out of painful personal experience. He was going to learn something interesting. Our punishments carry an inescapable lesson, Tamalani said. It is much more than the pain. Duncan sat on the floor at her feet. From this angle, Tamalani was a black-shrouded and ominous figure. We do not punish the ultimate agony, she said. That is reserved. We do not punish with the ultimate agony, she said. That is reserved for a Reverend Mother's passage through the spice. Duncan nodded. Library records referred to spice agony, a mysterious trial that created a Reverend Mother. Major punishments are painful nonetheless, she said. They are also emotionally painful. Emotion evoked by punishment is always that emotion we judge to be the pertinent's greatest weakness, and thus we strengthen the punished. Her words filled Duncan with unfocused dread. What were they doing to his guards? He could not speak, but there was no need. Tamalani was not finished. The punishment always ends with a dessert, she said, and she clapped her hands against her knees. Duncan frowned. Dessert? That was part of a banquet. How could a banquet be a punishment? It is not really a banquet, but the idea of a banquet, Tamalani said. One claw-like hand described a circle in the air. A desert comes, something totally unexpected. The penitent thinks, I have been forgiven at last. You understand? Duncan shook his head from side to side. No, he did not understand. It is the sweetness of the moment, she said. You have been through every course of a painful banquet and come out at the end to something you can savor. But, as you savor it, then comes the most painful moment of all, the recognition, the understanding that it is not pleasure at the end. No, indeed, this is the ultimate pain of the major punishment. It locks in the Bene Gesserit lesson. But what will she do to those guards? The words were wrenched from Duncan. I cannot say what the specific elements of the individual punishment will be. I have no need to know. I only can tell you that it will be different for each of them. Tamalani would say no more. She returned to laying out the next day's lessons. We will continue tomorrow, she said, teaching you to identify the sources of the various accents of spoken Galach. No one else, not even Teg or Patron, would answer his questions about the punishments. Even the guards, when she saw them afterwards, refused to speak of their ordeals. Some reacted curtly to his overtures, and none would play with him any more. There was no forgiveness among the punished. That much was clear. Damn Shuang Yu! Damn Shuang Yu! That was where his deep hatred of her began. All of the old witches shared in his hatred. Would the new young one be the same as the old ones? Damn Shuang Yu! When he demanded of Shuang Yu, why did you have to punish them? Shuang Yu took some time before answering. Then, it is dangerous for you here on Gamu. There are people who wish you harm. Duncan did not ask why. This was another area where his questions were never answered. Not even Teg would answer, although Teg's very presence emphasized the fact of that danger. And Miles Teg was a mentat, who must know many answers. Duncan often saw the old man's eyes glisten while his thoughts went far away. But there was no mentat response to such questions as, why are we here on Camus? Why do you guard against? Who wants to harm me? Who are my parents? Silence greeted such questions for some times. Teg would growl, I cannot answer you. The library was useless. He had discovered this when he was only 8, and his chief instructor was a failed Reverend Mother named Lunan Gyasa. Not quite as ancient as Shuang Yu, but well along in years. More than 100 anyway. At his demand, the library produced information about Gamu, Gaiety Prime, about the Harkonnens and their fall, about various conflicts where Teg had commanded. None of those battles came through as very bloody. Several commentaries referred to Teg's superb diplomacy. But, one datum leading to another, Duncan learned about the time of the God Emperor and on the taming of the people. This period commanded Duncan's attention for weeks. He found an old map in the record and projected it on the focus wall. The commentator's superimpositions told him that this very keep had been a fish speaker command center, abandoned among the scattering. Fish speakers. Duncan wished then that he had lived during this time, serving as one of the rare male advisors in the female army that had worshipped the great God Emperor. Oh, to have lived on Arrakis in those days. Teg was surprisingly forthcoming about the God Emperor, calling him always the Tyrant. A library lock was opened, and information about Arrakis came pouring out for Duncan. Will I ever see Arrakis? He asked Gyasa. You are being prepared to live there. The answer astonished him. Everything they taught him about that faraway planet came into new focus. Why will I live there? I cannot answer that. With renewed interest, he returned to his studies of that mysterious planet and its miserable church of Shai-Hulud, the divided god. Worms. The God Emperor had become those worms. The idea filled Duncan with awe. Perhaps there was something worthy of worship. The thought touched a chord in him. What had driven a man to accept that terrible metamorphosis? Duncan knew that his guards and the others in the keep thought about Arrakis and the core of priesthood there. Sneering remarks and laughter told it all. Teg said, We'll probably never know the whole truth of it, but I tell you, lad, there's no religion for a soldier. Shuang Yu capped it. You are to learn about the tyrant, but you are not to believe in his religion. That is beneath you. Contemptible. In every spare study moment, Duncan pored over whatever the library produced for him. The Holy Book of the Divided God, the Guard Bible, the Orange Catholic Bible, and even the Apocrypha. He learned about the long-defunct Bureau of the Faith and the pearl that is the Sun of Understanding. The very idea of the worms fascinated him. Their size. A big one would stretch from one end of the keep to the other. Men had ridden the pre-tyrant worms, but the Rakian priesthood forbade this now. The very idea of he found himself gripped by accounts from the archaeological team that had found the tyrant's primitive no-chamber on Arrakis. Der es Balat, the palace was called. The reports by archaeologist Hadi Benato were marked suppressed by orders of the Rakian priesthood. The file number on the accounts from the Bene Gesserit archives was a long one, and what Benotto received was fascinating. A kernel of the god's awareness in each worm? He asked Gyasa. So it said, and even if true, they are not conscious, not aware. The tyrant himself said he would enter an endless dream. Each study section occasioned a special lecture and Bene Gesserit explanations of religion until finally he encountered those accounts called the 9 Daughters of Siona and the 1,000 Sons of Idaho. Confronting Geasa, he demanded, "My name is Duncan Idaho, too. What does that mean?" Geasa always moved as though standing in the shadow of her failure, the long head bent forward and her watery eyes aimed at the ground. The confrontation occurred near evening in the long hall outside the practice floor. She paled at his question. When she did not answer, he demanded, "Am I descended from Duncan Idaho?" "You must ask Xuan Yu." Geasa sounded as though the words pained her. It was a familiar response, and it angered him. She meant he would be told something to shut up, little information in the telling. Xuan Yu, however, was more open than expected. "You carry the authentic blood of Duncan Idaho." "Who are my parents?" "They are long dead." "How did they die?" "I do not know. We received you as an orphan." "Then why do people want to harm me?" "No. Then why do people want to harm me?" "They fear what you may do." "What is it I may do?" "Study your lessons. All will be made clear to you in time." "Shut up and study." Another familiar answer. He obeyed because he had learned to recognize when the doors were closed on him. But now his questing intelligence met other accounts of the famine times and the scattering, the no chambers and no ships that could not be traced, not even by the most powerful, prescient minds in the universe. Here he encountered the fact that descendants of Duncan Idaho and Siona, those ancients who had served the tyrant god emperor, were invisible to prophets and prescients. Not even a guild steersman deep in melange trance could detect such people. Siona, the accounts told him, was a true-bred Atreides, and Duncan Idaho was a Gola. Gola? He probed the library for elaborations on this peculiar word. Gola. The library produced for him no more than bare-boned accounts. Golas, humans grown from a cadaver's cells in tleilaxu axolotl tanks. Axolotl tanks? A tleilaxu device for reproducing a living human being from the cells of a cadaver. Describe a Gola, he demanded. Innocent flesh, devoid of its original memories. See axolotl tanks. Duncan had learned to read the silences, the blank places in what the people of the keep revealed to him. Revelation swept over him. He knew. Only 10, and he knew. I am a Gola. Late afternoon in the library, all of those esoteric machinery around him faded into a sensory background, and a 10-year-old sat silently before a scanner, hugging the knowledge to himself. I am a Gola. He could not remember the axolotl tanks where his cells had grown into an infant. His first memories were of Geasa picking him up from his cradle, the alert interest in those adult eyes that had so soon faded into wary lidding. It was as though the information so grudgingly supplied him by the keep's people and records had at last defined a central shape, himself. Tell me about the Bene Gesserit, he demanded of the library. They are a people self-divided into face dancers and masters. Face dancers are mules, sterile and submissive to the masters. Why did they do this to me? The information machines of the library were suddenly alien and dangerous. He was afraid, not that his questions might meet more blank walls, but that he would receive answers. Why am I so important to Xuan Yu and the others? He felt that they had wronged him, even Miles Teg and Patron. Why was it right to take the cells of a human and produce a Gola? He asked the next question with great hesitation. Can a Gola even remember who he was? It can be done. How? The psychological identity of Gola to original presets certain responses which can be ignited by trauma. No answer at all. But how? Xuang Yu intruded at this point, arriving at the library unannounced. So something about his questions had been sent to alert her. All will be made clear to you in time, she said. She talked down to him. He sensed the injustice of it, the lack of truthfulness. Something within him said he carried more human wisdom in his unawakened self than the ones who presumed themselves so superior. His hatred of Xuang Yu reached a new intensity. She was the personification of all who tantalized him and frustrated his questions. Now, though, his imagination was on fire. He would recapture his original memories. He felt the truth of this. He would remember his parents, his family, his friends, his enemies. He demanded it of Xuang Yu. Did you produce me because of my enemies? You have already learned silence, child, she said. Rely on that knowledge. Very well, that's how I will fight, damned Xuang Yu. I will be silent and I will learn. I won't show you how I really feel. You know, she said, I think we're raising a stoic. She patronized him. He would not be patronized. He would fight them with all silence and watchfulness. Duncan ran from the library and huddled in his room. In the following months, many things confirmed that he was a Gola. Even a child knew when things around him were extraordinary. He saw other children occasionally behind the walls, walking along the perimeter road, laughing and calling. He found accounts of children in the library. Adults did not come to those children and engage them in rigorous training of the sort imposed on him. Other children did not have a Reverend Mother Xuang Yu to order every smallest aspect of their lives. His discovery precipitated another change in Duncan's life. Lurin Gyasa was called away from him and he did not return. She was not supposed to let me know about Golas. The truth was somewhat more complex, as Xuang Yu explained to Lucilla on the observation parapet the day of Lucilla's arrival. We knew the information moment would come. We knew the inevitable moment would come. He would learn about Golas and ask the pointed questions. It was high time a Reverend Mother took over his everyday education. Gyasa may have been a mistake. Are you questioning my judgment? Xuang Yu snapped. Lucilla's soft contralto, the question, is your judgment so perfect that it may never be questioned? In Lucilla's soft contralto, the question had the impact of a slap. Xuang Yu remained silent for almost a minute. Presently she said, Gyasa thought the Gola was an endearing child. She cried, and she said she would miss him. Wasn't she warned about that? Gyasa did not have our training. So you replaced her with Tamalane at that time. I do not know Tamalane, but I presume she is quite old. Quite? What was his reaction to the removal of Gyasa? He asked where she had gone. We did not answer. How did Tamalane fare? On his third day, he told her very calmly, I hate you. Is that what I'm supposed to do? So quickly. Right now, he's watching you and thinking, I hate Xuang Yu. Will I have to hate this new one? But he is also thinking that you are not like the old other witches. You're young. He will know that this must be important.